Welcome to my 1000 Topic English channel. Today, we'll be learning an English story to enhance our listening and writing skills. Subscribe now and join us as we explore amazing English words, vocabulary, and grammar to help you grow and succeed. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below and let us know what you'd love to see next. Once, in a small town nestled at the foot of the mountains, there lived a young woman named Clara. Clara was many things: kind, curious, and fiercely loyal to those she loved. But there was one thing Clara was not: brave. At least, not when it came to heights. The mere thought of looking down from a tall building made her knees wobble and her stomach twists into knots. It was a fear that had followed her since childhood, a shadow she could never quite outrun. But Clara was tired of running. Tired of letting fear dictate her life. And so, on a crisp autumn morning, she found herself standing at the base of Eagle's Peak, one of the most daunting cliffs in the region. The wind tugged at her jacket, and the sun cast long shadows across the rocky face that loomed above her. It was a monster of stone, jagged and unyielding, and it seemed to stare down at her with a silent challenge. Beside her stood Jake, her best friend since childhood. Jake was the kind of person who seemed to belong in the mountains. He was tall and lean, with a mop of unruly blonde hair and a smile that could light up even the darkest of days. He had been climbing for as long as Clara could remember, and he had always tried to convince her to join him. But she had always refused until now. "You don't have to do this," Jake said, his voice soft but firm. He was adjusting his harness, his movements practiced and effortless. "We can turn back right now. No one would blame you." Clara shook her head, her dark hair whipping around her face. "I do have to do this," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I can't keep living like this, Jake. I can't keep letting fear control me." Jake studied her for a moment, his blue eyes searching hers. Then he nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "All right," he said. "But remember, it's not about reaching the top. It's about pushing yourself, one step at a time. If you need to stop, we stop. No shame in that." Clara nodded, though her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure Jake could hear it. She tightened her harness and double-checked her gear, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the carabiners. The equipment felt foreign and heavy, a stark reminder of how out of place she was in this world of ropes and cliffs. "Ready?" Jake asked, his voice steady and reassuring. Clara took a deep breath, the cool mountain air filling her lungs. She looked up at the cliff, its jagged edges cutting into the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. For a moment, she thought about turning back. But then she thought about all the times she had let fear hold her back, the roller coasters she had avoided, the balconies she had refused to step onto, the opportunities she had let slip away. She thought about the life she wanted to live, a life where she wasn't ruled by fear. "Ready," she said, her voice stronger this time. The climb the first few meters were easier than Clara had expected. The rock face was rough and provided plenty of handholds, and Jake's calm instructions guided her every move. "Left hand here," he would say, "or right foot there." Clara focused on his voice, letting it anchor her as she climbed higher and higher. But as the ground fell away beneath her, the fear began to creep in. Her palms grew slick with sweat, and her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She could feel the weight of the void below her, pulling at her like a magnet. Her muscles trembled, and her mind screamed at her to stop, to turn back, to get as far away from this cliff as possible. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Yes, you can," Jake replied, his voice calm and steady. "You're doing great, Clara. Just focus on the next move. Don't think about how far you've come or how far you have to go. Just focus on the next step." Clara nodded, though her whole body was shaking. She forced herself to take a deep breath and reached for the next handhold. Her fingers closed around the rough stone, and she pulled herself up, her muscles burning with the effort. She repeated Jake's words in her head like a mantra, just focus on the next move. Just focus on the next move. The breaking point, but then, about halfway up the cliff, Clara made a mistake. Her foot slipped on a loose rock, and for a terrifying moment, she was hanging by nothing but her fingertips. Her heart leapt into her throat, and a scream tore from her lips. The ground below seemed to rush up to meet her, and she could feel the panic rising like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. Clara! Jake's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. Look at me. Look at me. Clara forced herself to turn her head, her eyes locking onto Jake's. His face was pale, but his expression was calm and steady. You're okay, he said, his voice firm. You're not going to fall. Just breathe. Breathe with me. Clara nodded, her chest heaving as she tried to match her breathing to Jake's. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Slowly, the panic began to recede, and she felt her grip on the rock steady. When Clara finally pulled herself over the edge of the cliff, she collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving and her muscles screaming in protest. But as she lay there, staring up at the endless blue sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. She had done it. She had faced her fear and conquered it. Jake sat down beside her, a grin spreading across his face. Told you you could do it, he said. Clara laughed, the sound bubbling up from deep within her. Yeah, she said, her voice filled with wonder. I guess I did. And as she sat there, the wind tugging at her hair and the sun warming her face, Clara realized something: the fear hadn't gone away. It was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind. But it didn't control her anymore. She had faced it, and she had won. And that was enough.